Hi everyone, this will be a short video lecture all about unconformities. What I'm showing here is a photograph from your text that's probably one of the most famous field locations for an unconformity in the world. And it shows gently dipping Devonian red beds, those are the sedimentary beds that are at the top of the picture, overlying vertical beds of Ordovician sandstone. The contact between the two beds, which is delineated in the annotated photograph on the right, represents an unconformity. So in today's short lecture, I'm going to talk some more about what those unconformities are exactly. An unconformity is a surface of non-deposition and/or erosion, and they mark gaps of time that are missing from the sedimentary record. The particular type of unconformity that's shown in this photograph is called an angular unconformity because it places sedimentary beds against one another that are dipping at very different angles. As we move forward in this lecture, I will explain that there are different types of unconformities, and angular is just one of them. But before I do that, I thought I would explain a little bit more about unconformities by walking you through this photograph. So this photo may seem at first glance kind of simple, but I want to walk you through all of the things that it tells us about the geologic history of this area. So first, I'm always going to start from the bottom up, since we know that sedimentary beds, thanks to the law of superposition, are oldest at the bottom and youngest at the top. So I'm going to make a sequence of events, and I will actually write it on the page from the bottom up. So first we have deposition of the Ordovician sandstone. So I'm just going to abbreviate that Ord. Deposition of the Ordovician sandstone. And we know that that happens horizontally, thanks to the law of original horizontality. Okay, so you can clearly see that they are not horizontal now. If I outline some of the beds in the Ordovician sandstone, they're nearly vertical. So I'm just kind of tracing some of them right now. Okay, so that means that after deposition of the Ordovician sandstone, they were uplifted and tilted to a very steep angle. Okay, so we know that had to have happened. After the tilting of those beds, erosion happened. Perhaps erosion was even happening as they were being uplifted and tilted. And I wrote uplifted and lifted, so let me see if I can fix that. Tilted. Okay, so then they had to have been eroded, and we know they had to have been eroded down to some flat low-lying area because now we've got new sandstone being deposited on top. Now we've got deposition of the Devonian sandstone, and lastly we have tilting of all of the rocks because the Devonian sandstones themselves are not horizontal. So you can see that there's actually a lot that's going on here, and the angular unconformity, which is the contact between the Ordovician and the Devonian sandstones, is what tells us that this period of erosion happened. So the unconformity is marking this gap of missing time in the sedimentary record during which no sedimentary rocks were being deposited, but rather non-deposition or erosion was happening. Here's a cartoon image from your text that walks you through how an angular unconformity might develop. So first you have sedimentary beds in the top that are originally horizontal, but are being folded thanks to compressional stresses active in the tectonics of mountain building. Later, erosion occurs to kind of bevel off the top of those mountains. And then finally, new layers of sedimentary rock are deposited, and an angular unconformity develops between the folded and tilted old layers and the new horizontal layers. So that contact between the old and the new represents a period of time when no sediment was being deposited, rather erosion was happening at the surface, and it juxtaposes sedimentary rocks of differing angles. In addition to angular unconformities, there is a second type of unconformity, which we call a non-conformity. Non-conformities place sedimentary rocks against metamorphic or igneous rock types that had to have formed deep within the earth. In this case, we have a sandstone, which is this kind of pale tannish yellow thing up here that is deposited on top of a granite. And as you guys know, granites are intrusive igneous rocks, so they crystallize beneath the surface of the earth. You also know that sandstones and other sedimentary rocks are deposited at the surface of the earth. So in order to juxtapose these two rock types, you must uplift, exhume, and erode the granite, and then later put sandstone on top of it. The blue line that I've traced here is the nonconformity. That is the contact or the surface of erosion. I'll abbreviate it. Well, no, I won't. I'll write it all out. That's the nonconformity. We can look at another card image of this. So in this case, this right here is our granite that intruded into these horizontally bedded sedimentary rocks. And this dashed line here represents the future erosional surface. So over time, all of this material is going to be eroded away. And now we just have granite with our dinosaur running across the top of it. Later, we get deposition of new sedimentary beds, and those new layers are being deposited on top of basement here that was originally deep within the earth, but is now at the surface and available for accumulating sediment on top of it. So this nonconformity here represents a period of erosion and missing time, essentially, in the rock record between when the granite crystallized and when these new sedimentary beds were deposited. Okay, lastly is something called a disconformity. I like to think of disconformities as being, I remember the name disconformity because it starts with DI, which is also what the word difficult starts with. And that's because disconformities can be difficult to recognize in stratigraphic layers. A disconformity juxtaposes sedimentary beds against one another that are not dipping at different angles, but that in which there may be an erosion surface preserved. So let's look at this image here. We've got sea level dropping. Okay, so here we've got our horizontally bedded sedimentary rocks. They are being deposited and lithified in a shallow ocean somewhere. Then sea level drops such that these rocks are exposed above the surface of the water and are now being eroded. So this irregular erosion surface develops across which our dinosaur is running. Later, sea level rises again and you get new sedimentary beds deposited. And you can see here that they are all horizontal. So they have not been tilted to produce different angles that would make the unconformity really obvious. The unconformity, which is a disconformity in this case, is there, and it does represent this period of time wherein sediment wasn't being deposited, rather it was being eroded. So it represents this period of time here when erosion was happening. But it's not easy to see. In fact, it's difficult to see. Disconformities are difficult to see because you'd have to look closely to see that this is not a bedding plane, but rather a disconformity. I'm going to leave it here, and I would like all of you guys to pause this video and think about this geologic block diagram. So it's a little more complicated than the ones we did in class together last Thursday, but it does include some examples of different types of unconformities. There's a nonconformity, there's an angular unconformity, and there's a disconformity. So I would like you to try to figure out the sequence of events as represented in these green boxes. Maybe get out a piece of scratch paper and try to figure out what came first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, etc. We will hopefully be able to discuss this very briefly in class on Thursday, and I will be asking you guys to see if you can figure out or recognize these types of unconformities in the figure. See you then.